The Galactic Council chamber stretched wide like a great dome, filled with beings from across the stars. Floating platforms held delegates from hundreds of worlds, each species more strange and wonderful than the last. The Ultrons sat with their silver skin gleaming under the chamber lights. The massive Cordon delegates took up entire platforms with their rock-like bodies. Near the back, almost forgotten, sat the human delegation. Captain David Reed watched from the observation deck as the council meeting played out below. 300 years humans had been part of this great gathering of civilizations, and still they were treated like children allowed to sit at the adult table. The other species barely looked their way when humans spoke. Most of the time they did not speak at all. "Look at them down there," said Navigator Lisa Park, standing beside David. Her voice carried the frustration they all felt. "Acting like we don't exist." Below them, the Vorthan ambassador was speaking. General Korak stood tall on his platform, his scaled skin dark green under the lights. His voice boomed across the chamber as he demanded more territory for his expanding empire. The other delegates listened with respect, even fear. When the Vorthans spoke, people paid attention. "The weak species of this galaxy need strong leadership," Korax declared, his yellow eyes scanning the chamber. "The Vorthan Empire brings order where there is chaos. We bring strength where there is weakness." David felt his hands tighten into fists. He had seen what Vorthan order looked like. Just last week, his ship had passed near the Ultron colonies in the Outer Rim. What they witnessed there still made his stomach turn. "Captain," said Engineer Marcus Webb, approaching from behind. "Our report on the Ultron situation is ready for submission." David took the datapad from Marcus. The images and sensor readings told a clear story. Vorthan warships had attacked 3 peaceful Ultron settlements. They had not been quick deaths. The Vorthans had taken their time, making examples of the colonists. Men, women, children. It made no difference to them. "Are you sure about this?" asked Communications Officer Tom Hayes. "Once we submit this, there's no taking it back." David looked at his crew. These were good people who had served with him for years. They had all seen what he had seen. The screams over the communication channels, the burning cities, the escape pods being hunted down like prey. "We have to try," David said. "It's why we're here." The human delegation platform was called forward. Ambassador Helen Cross stood to address the council. She was a small woman compared to most of the aliens around her, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. David had always respected that about her. "Honored delegates," Ambassador Cross began. "We bring urgent news from the Outer Rim. 3 Ultron colonies have been attacked and destroyed. Our evidence shows these attacks were carried out by Vorthan military forces." The chamber fell silent for a moment. Then the laughter began. It started with the Vorthans but spread to other delegations. Not all of them, but enough to fill the great dome with the sound of mockery. General Korak stepped forward on his platform. "The humans speak of military operations they could not possibly understand. Perhaps their primitive sensors malfunctioned? It would not be the first time." More laughter rippled through the chamber. David felt his face burn with anger. Primitive sensors? Human technology was more advanced than most species realized, but they had learned long ago to keep that fact to themselves. "We have detailed recordings," Ambassador Cross continued, her voice steady despite the mockery. "Testimony from survivors." "Clear evidence of evidence?" Korax interrupted. "Or human imagination? Your species has always been prone to wild stories. Perhaps you should leave military matters to those who understand them." The Cordon delegate raised one massive stone hand. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding rocks. "The humans mean well, but they lack experience in these matters. The Outer Rim is dangerous. Pirates and raiders are common." Perhaps that is what they saw. David wanted to scream. Pirates? He had fought real pirates before. This was different. This was systematic, This was genocide. But no one in the chamber wanted to hear it. Ambassador Cross tried again. If the Council would review our evidence, the Council has more important matters to discuss, said the Trillian representative, her three heads speaking in unison. We cannot investigate every minor incident reported by overeager species. The dismissal was complete. The human platform was moved back to its position near the rear of the chamber. David watched as Ambassador Cross sat down, her shoulders sagging slightly. 300 years of this. 300 years of being ignored, dismissed, treated like the galaxy's unwanted stepchildren. The meeting continued with discussions of trade routes and territorial disputes. Important matters that required the attention of important species. The humans sat in silence, as they always did, as they were expected to do. After the session ended, David made his way down to meet with Ambassador Cross. She looked tired, older than her 60 years. The weight of representing humanity in this hostile environment was taking its toll. Good work today, David told her. She gave him a sad smile. Was it? Nothing will come of this. Nothing ever does. At least we tried. Yes, she said, looking back at the empty chamber. We tried. David returned to his ship, the merchant vessel New Hope. It was not much to look at, a simple cargo hauler with basic defensive systems. Like most human ships in the galaxy, it was designed to avoid trouble, not fight it. That was the human way. Keep your head down, don't make waves. Try to fit in. His crew was waiting for him in the ship's small meeting room. They had all watched the council session on the ship's communication system. Their faces showed the same frustration David felt. So that's it? Marcus asked. We just let them get away with it? What choice do we have? Lisa replied. We can't fight the entire Vorthan Empire, can't we? Tom said quietly. I mean, really, can't we? The question hung in the air. David looked at his crew, these people who had become his family over the years of traveling between the stars. They were tired of being pushed around, tired of being ignored, tired of watching innocents die while the galaxy's leaders looked the other way. We follow orders, David said finally. We report what we see and let others decide what to do about it. But even as he said the words, David felt something stirring inside him, a feeling he had not experienced in years. It was anger, yes, but something more. Something that felt almost like hope. The message from Earth Command came through 3 days later. David read in his cabin, alone. The orders were simple and expected. Continue normal operations. File incident reports through proper channels. Maintain diplomatic protocols at all times. But there was something else in the message. A single line that seemed innocent enough to anyone who might intercept it. Weather conditions on Luna remain stable. David stared at that line for a long time. Weather conditions on Luna. The moon had no atmosphere. There was no weather to speak of. Unless you knew what the phrase really meant. He thought about the Altran children he had seen in the escape pod recordings. Their frightened faces as Vorthan fighters closed in. He thought about Ambassador Cross sitting in that chamber, trying desperately to make someone care about mass murder while aliens laughed at her. 300 years of patience. 300 years of playing by rules that were designed to keep humanity in its place. 300 years of being the quiet species. That never caused trouble. Maybe it was time for that to change. 6 months passed since the council meeting, and the galaxy grew darker with each passing day. Reports came in from across the Outer Rim territories, each one worse than the last. The Vorthan Empire was expanding faster than anyone had predicted, and their methods were becoming more brutal. Captain David Reed stood in the observation lounge of the research station Prometheus, watching Dr. Emma Shaw work at her computer. The xenobiologist had been studying alien species for 15 years, but lately her research had taken a disturbing turn. Charts and graphs covered her screens, showing patterns that made David's blood run cold. "Show me again," David said. Emma pulled up a galactic map dotted with different colored markers. "The red dots are aggressive species like the Vorthons. The blue dots are peaceful ones like the Ultron and Mandai." "Look at the pattern," David studied the map. The red dots were scattered, but they were all in systems that had been harsh, dangerous worlds. The blue dots clustered around systems with abundant resources and stable environments. They never had to fight for survival. "Exactly," Emma said, her voice tired. "The peaceful species evolved on paradise worlds. They never developed concepts like total war because they never needed them. Even the aggressive species like the Vorthons have honor codes and rules of engagement. They fight to prove strength, not to destroy completely." "And humans?" Emma brought up Earth's profile on her screen. The data was sobering. Hundreds of major wars throughout history, weapons that could destroy entire continents, strategies that prioritized victory over honor. "We're different, David. We're the only species that learned to wage war without limits." The communication system chimed with an incoming message. David recognized the encryption pattern immediately. It was from his old friend Captain Robert Kane, who commanded a patrol ship near the Mindai homeworld. Kane's face appeared on the screen, but he looked nothing like the confident officer David remembered. His eyes were haunted, his face pale. "David, you need to see this. The Mind AI... They're gone." The recording that followed would haunt David for the rest of his life. The Mindai had been a telepathic species, gentle beings who could communicate across vast distances with their minds. They had never developed weapons because they could feel the pain of anyone they hurt. The Vorthons had seen this as weakness. The footage showed Mindai being loaded into transport ships like cargo. Their telepathic abilities were being used to coordinate Vorthon fleet movements across the galaxy. The gentle beings who had once used their gifts to bring peace were now forced to help plan wars. "They're not killing them," Kane said in the recording. "They're keeping them alive to use as living computers. The Mindai can feel the pain of everyone who dies in the battles they're forced to help plan. It's driving them mad." David felt something break inside him as he watched. These were the same beings who had welcomed humanity to the galaxy 3 centuries ago. They had been kind to the strange new species from a small blue world, offering friendship when others offered only suspicion. More reports came in over the following weeks. The aquatic Delph had been torn from their ocean worlds and forced to work in desert mining operations. Their gills were sealed, forcing them to breathe through crude mechanical devices that barely kept them alive. The crystalline Vex were being harvested, their bodies broken down to power Vorthon war machines. Each time the human delegation brought these reports to the council, they were dismissed. The other species had their own problems to worry about: trade disputes, territorial claims, resource shortages. The suffering of distant worlds seemed less important than their immediate concerns. David found himself reassigned to patrol duty along the galaxy's edge, far from the trade routes and diplomatic missions he was used to. His orders were vague: investigate reports of pirate activity, ensure safe passage for merchant vessels, maintain a human presence in the outer territories. But David knew the real reason for his reassignment. Someone in Earth Command wanted him to see what was happening out there. They wanted him to witness the consequences of the galaxy's indifference. His new assignment took him to the ruins of Ultron colonies, where entire cities had been turned to glass by Vorthon plasma weapons. He found survivors hiding in the wreckage, families torn apart by systematic slaughter. The Ultron who remained alive spoke in whispers about human ships that had passed through the system just before the attacks. They wondered why the humans had not helped. David had no answer for them. How could he explain that his orders were to observe and report, not to intervene? How could he tell these broken people that humanity had chosen to be quiet spectators while their world burned? His crew was growing restless. Marcus Webb, his engineer, had lost his brother in what the reports called a pirate attack. But the weapon signatures were clearly Vorthan, and everyone knew it. Marcus spent his off-duty hours modifying the ships systems, making improvements that went far beyond standard maintenance protocols. Lisa Park, his navigator, had started mapping every system they visited with unusual detail. She tracked patrol routes, defensive positions, supply lines. When David asked why, she simply said it was good to be prepared. Tom Hayes, his communications officer, was intercepting and recording Vorthan military transmissions. Officially, it was intelligence gathering. Unofficially, it was evidence of war crimes that no one seemed willing to prosecute. The breaking point came when they arrived at Kepler Station, a small human outpost that served as a refueling stop for ships traveling between the Outer Rim and the core worlds. The station manager, an old man named Peter Gray, had been David's instructor at the academy 20 years ago. "You look like hell, David," Gray said as they shared a drink in the station's small bar. "Feel like it too," David replied. "We're watching the galaxy tear itself apart, and we can't do anything about it." Gray was quiet for a long moment, then leaned closer. "Can't we? Or won't we? What do you mean?" "I've been running this station for 30 years, David. I see things. I hear things. You think all those cargo ships that stop here are really carrying farm equipment and medical supplies?" David stared at his old instructor. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe humanity hasn't been as quiet as everyone thinks. Maybe we've been using these 300 years to do more than just keep our heads down." That night, David lay in his bunk thinking about Gray's words. He thought about the coded message he had received months ago. Weather conditions on Luna remain stable. He thought about Marcus's constant tinkering with the ship's systems, about Lisa's detailed maps, about Tom's careful recording of everything they encountered. 3 days later, another message arrived from Earth Command. This one was different. Instead of the usual routine orders, it contained a single set of coordinates and a timestamp. David recognized the location. It was Luna Station, humanity's oldest space facility. The message was signed by Admiral Grace Thompson, a name David knew well. She was supposed to be retired, living quietly on Earth after a long career in merchant fleet coordination. But the authorization codes in the message were current, and at the highest level of classification. David looked at his crew as they read the message. They all understood what it meant. After 300 years of patience, something was about to change. "Set course for Luna," David ordered. As the New Hope turned toward the inner system, David felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Humanity had been quiet for so long that the galaxy had forgotten they existed. But David was beginning to suspect that quiet did not mean sleeping. It meant waiting, and the waiting was almost over. The journey to Luna took 3 days, but David felt like it lasted forever. His crew was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about what they might find when they arrived. The coordinates in the message led to a section of Luna they had never visited before, far from the tourist stations and commercial docks that most people knew about. As they approached Luna Station, David expected to see the familiar sight of the old research facility where humanity had taken its first steps into space. Instead, his sensors showed something impossible. The small research station had been replaced by a massive military complex that stretched across the lunar surface like a sleeping giant. "Captain," Lisa said from her navigation station, her voice filled with disbelief, "I'm reading over 200 ships in orbit around Luna. Most of them are showing as civilian freighters, but the sensor profiles don't match." David looked at the display screen. The ships floating in space around Luna looked like ordinary cargo vessels, the kind that carried goods between human colonies. But Lisa was right. Their power signatures were wrong. Their hull configurations were strange. They were something else wearing the mask of peaceful traders. "Incoming transmission," Tom announced. Admiral Thompson requests permission to come aboard. David nodded, though his mind was reeling. Admiral Grace Thompson was supposed to be a retired coordinator of merchant shipping. She had spent her career making sure human trade ships ran on schedule and carried the right paperwork. She was not the kind of person who commanded secret military installations. The airlock cycled, and Admiral Thompson stepped aboard the New Hope. She was a woman in her 70s with gray hair and kind eyes that reminded David of his grandmother. She wore a simple uniform with no decoration except for rank insignia that David had never seen before. "Captain Reed," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be confusing." "That's one word for it," David replied. "Admiral, what is all this?" Thompson smiled, but there was something steel-hard behind her gentle expression. "This is what humanity has been building for 300 years, Captain. This is what we do when the galaxy forces us to stop being quiet." She led David and his crew through corridors that looked nothing like the Luna station he remembered from Academy training videos. The walls were lined with displays showing star maps, fleet positions, and tactical analyses. Personnel moved with the quick efficiency of a military operation that had been planned down to the smallest detail. They entered a briefing room, where other ship captains were already waiting. David recognized some faces from his years of service, but others were strangers. All of them had the same look of stunned disbelief that David felt. "Gentlemen and ladies," Admiral Thompson began, "welcome to the real human space program. For 3 centuries, while the galaxy saw us as harmless merchants and farmers, we have been preparing for this day. Every trade mission was also a reconnaissance mission. Every colony was also a forward base. Every peaceful gesture was also a strategic deception." She activated a holographic display that showed the entire galaxy. Human settlements appeared as blue dots scattered across known space. But as the display shifted, those dots connected with lines showing hidden supply routes, communication networks, and staging areas. "We learned early that the galaxy would never respect us," Thompson continued. "So we decided to be underestimated. We let them think we were weak while we built strength. We let them think we were few while we spread everywhere. We let them think we were simple while we planned for every possibility." David stared at the display. There were human bases and systems he had never heard of. Ships that were supposed to be decommissioned were showing as active fleet units. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. The New Geneva colony was attacked. 2 days ago, Thompson said, her voice growing cold. 50,000 civilians, including 15,000 children. The Vorthans broadcast the attack across the galaxy as entertainment for their troops. They wanted to show that even humans could be touched. They wanted to prove that no one was safe from their power. Images appeared on the screen that made David's stomach turn. The Vorthans had not simply destroyed New Geneva. They had turned the colonists' suffering into a spectacle, broadcasting their torture and death as a demonstration of Vorthan strength. The galaxy had watched, and once again, no one had acted. "The Galactic Council met in emergency session yesterday," Thompson continued. "They declared the attack a regrettable misunderstanding that would be thoroughly investigated. No action was taken, no sanctions were imposed, no justice was offered." David felt something inside him break and reshape itself into something harder. He thought about the families on New Geneva, the children who had died while the galaxy watched and did nothing. He thought about the Mindai being driven insane as they were forced to plan their own people's destruction. He thought about 300 years of patience and restraint that had bought them nothing but contempt. "What are our orders, Admiral?" he asked. Doc Thompson smiled, and for the first time, David saw the true predator that lived behind her grandmother's face. "Operation Silent Thunder begins in 72 hours. Every human ship in the galaxy will receive activation codes. Every hidden base will reveal itself. Every weapon we have spent centuries developing will be deployed. She handed David a datapad containing new ship specifications. As he read, his eyes grew wide. The New Hope was not the simple cargo hauler he thought it was. Hidden in its hull were weapon systems more advanced than anything the Vorthons possessed. Cloaking devices that could make it invisible to any known sensor. Engines that could outrun the fastest warships in the galaxy. The ship you have been flying for 5 years is actually the heavy cruiser Retribution, Thompson explained. Your crew has been specially selected and trained for this mission. Every maintenance procedure Marcus performed was actually weapons preparation. Every navigation route Lisa plotted was actually tactical positioning. Every communication Tom monitored was actually intelligence gathering. David looked at his crew. They were staring back at him with expressions of understanding dawning on their faces. Marcus had been preparing weapon systems he thought were cargo handlers. Lisa had been plotting attack routes she thought were trade paths. Tom had been gathering military intelligence he thought was routine monitoring. We knew? David asked. Part of you knew, Thompson replied. We could not risk full knowledge in case of capture, but your subconscious minds were prepared for this moment. Every human in space has been living a double life, Captain. Now it is time to choose which life is real. Dr. Emma Shaw entered the briefing room carrying a thick folder of research data. Captain Reed, I have completed the tactical analysis you requested. David looked confused. I didn't request any analysis. Your unconscious mind did, Shaw replied. 3 months ago, you asked me to study alien species for trade purposes. What you really asked for was a complete vulnerability assessment of every major power in the galaxy. She opened the folder, revealing detailed studies of alien biology, psychology, and military doctrine. The Vorthons are physically strong, but psychologically dependent on their image of invincibility. The Cordon are nearly indestructible but move slowly and cannot adapt quickly to changing tactics. Most species have never faced an enemy that fights without honor codes or mercy. And humans? David asked. Humans are the only species in the galaxy that learn to wage total war, Shaw replied. We are the only ones who fight to win rather than to prove something. We are the only ones who understand that sometimes survival requires becoming the monster. Admiral Thompson stood at the center of the room, looking at each captain in turn. The galaxy wanted to see humanity roar. They pushed us until we had no choice but to show them what we really are. In 72 hours, Operation Silent Thunder begins. We will show them that quiet does not mean weak. We will show them that patience is not the same as passivity. She paused, letting her words sink in. We will show them what happens when you force the most dangerous species in the galaxy to stop pretending to be harmless. David felt the weight of 3 centuries of human history settling on his shoulders. All the wars, all the suffering, all the hard lessons learned in blood and fire. Humanity had tried to leave that history behind when they reached for the stars. But the galaxy would not let them forget who they really were. When do we begin? David asked. Thompson's smile was cold. As winter on a dead world. We already have, Captain. We already have. The activation codes came exactly 72 hours later. David was on the bridge of the Retribution, watching his crew work with new understanding of their true purpose. Marcus had activated the ship's hidden weapon systems, transforming their cargo hauler into a predator that could hunt anything in space. Lisa had plotted attack coordinates for 17 different star systems. Tom was coordinating with human ships across the galaxy through encrypted channels that had been silent for 3 centuries. All stations report ready, Captain, Marcus announced. His voice carried none of the uncertainty it had held just days before. The engineer who had spent years pretending to fix civilian equipment was gone, replaced by a weapons specialist who knew every system on the ship better than His own heartbeat. David looked at the tactical display showing Vorthan fleet positions throughout the galaxy. For 300 years, humanity had watched and recorded everything. They knew where every Vorthan ship was located, what weapons they carried, how fast they could respond to threats. The enemy had no idea they were being hunted. Execute operation. Silent thunder, David commanded. Across 17 star systems, humanity struck at exactly the same moment. The attacks were surgical, devastating, and completely unexpected. Human ships that had been invisible to alien sensors suddenly appeared from empty space, their cloaking fields dropping like veils being torn away. In the Kepler system, David led a task force of 12 ships against a Vorthan fleet that outnumbered them 3-1. The enemy admiral probably expected an easy victory against the weak humans. He learned differently when the first salvo of human weapons tore through his flagship shields like they were made of paper. "Their weapons can't lock onto us," Lisa reported with fierce satisfaction. "Our cloaking technology is beyond anything. They understand." The Vorthan ships fired wildly into space, trying to hit targets they could not see. Their plasma cannons and particle beams found nothing but vacuum, while human weapons struck with precision that seemed impossible. The enemy had built their tactics around honorable combat between visible opponents. They had no defense against an enemy that refused to fight fair. "Direct hit on the command ship," Marcus announced. "Their shields are down to 30%. David watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. The Vorthans were brave fighters, he would give them that. But bravery meant nothing against superior technology and tactics. Human weapons phased through matter, striking directly at ship cores and reactor systems. Human ships moved like ghosts, appearing just long enough to deliver death before vanishing again. The battle lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, the entire Vorthan fleet was either destroyed or surrendering. Not a single human ship had been lost. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. At the Mindai homeworld, a human rescue fleet freed the enslaved telepaths and turned their abilities against their former captors. The Mindai, no longer forced to coordinate Vorthan attacks, began sending waves of terror and confusion through enemy ranks. Warriors who had never known fear suddenly found their minds filled with the anguish of their victims. In the Dove system, human marines stormed the mining facilities where the aquatic aliens were being tortured. The Vorthans guarding the camps had expected to fight other warriors, not soldiers who treated war as a science rather than an art. The humans used gas weapons that bypassed Vorthan armor, sonic devices that disrupted their nervous systems, and tactics that seemed to come from nightmares. The galaxy watched in shock as footage spread through communication networks. For the first time, they saw humans as they truly were. Not peaceful farmers and traders, but warriors who had spent 3 centuries studying every form of conflict their species had ever engaged in. They fought with the accumulated knowledge of every war Earth had ever seen, refined and perfected for use against alien enemies. General Corax, the Vorthan ambassador who had mocked humanity in the council chambers, found his homeworld surrounded by a human fleet within hours of the first attacks. He demanded to speak with the human commander, expecting to arrange an honorable surrender between warriors. Admiral Thompson's face appeared on his communication screen, still looking like someone's kindly grandmother. "General Corax," she said with polite courtesy, "you wanted to see what humanity looked like when we stopped being quiet. Are you satisfied with the demonstration?" "This is not honorable combat," Corax protested. "You fight like cowards, hiding behind technology and tricks. Face us in honest battle, and we will show you the strength of the Vorthan warrior spirit." Thompson's smile never wavered, but her eyes grew cold as space itself. "Honor is a luxury for species that never faced extinction, General. We learned long ago that survival matters more than glory. Your ships are surrounded. Your fleets are destroyed. Your empire is finished. Surrender now, or watch your homeworld burn from orbit. Never, Korak snarled. The Vorthan Empire will never bow to inferior beings. We will fight to the last warrior. No, Thompson replied calmly, you won't. Because unlike you, we studied psychology as well as warfare. Your entire culture is built on the image of Vorthan invincibility. What happens to warrior spirits when that image is shattered? She was right. Across Vorthan space, reports came in of mass surrenders and internal rebellions. The warrior culture that had seemed so strong crumbled when faced with the reality of total defeat. Vorthan soldiers who had never imagined losing suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that had already won before the first shot was fired. But humanity's true genius was not in their weapons or technology. It was in their understanding of war itself. While other species fought to conquer territory or prove strength, humans fought to achieve specific goals. They did not want to rule the galaxy. They wanted to make sure that wars like this could never happen again. On worlds throughout Vorthan space, human occupation forces began the work of transformation. They did not enslave the Vorthans or steal their resources. Instead, they began the slow process of changing a warrior culture into something that could coexist with peaceful species. Schools were built to teach Vorthan children about cooperation instead of conquest. Warriors were retrained as engineers and scientists. The entire foundation of their society was rebuilt from the ground up. Other aggressive species surrendered before human fleets could reach them. The Cordon sent ambassadors begging for mercy. The Trillin offered to pay tribute. The sight of the mighty Vorthan Empire falling in less than a week had taught them that resistance was futile. The Galactic Council tried desperately to restore order. They called for immediate ceasefires and demanded that all parties return to diplomatic negotiations. Emergency sessions were held to address what they called the human crisis. The human response was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. Ambassador Cross, who had spent years being ignored and mocked, stood before the assembled delegates with a very different demeanor than before. She no longer looked like a humble representative asking for favors. She looked like the voice of a power that could not be denied. For 3 centuries, we brought you evidence of atrocities, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the galaxy. For 3 centuries, you ignored our warnings and dismissed our concerns. You told us to be patient while innocents died. You told us to work within the system while that system protected murderers. The chamber was silent. No one laughed now. No one interrupted or dismissed her words. You had 300 years to stop this, Cross continued. You chose to look away. You chose to protect your own interests while peaceful species suffered and died. Now face the consequences of your cowardice and your corruption. The message was clear. The old order was finished. The galaxy would never again ignore the suffering of the innocent while those in power looked away. Humanity had tried to work within the system for 3 centuries. Now they would build a new system, one that protected the weak instead of enabling the strong. The war that had taken the Vorthans decades to plan was over in 6 months. But the transformation of the galaxy was just beginning. 1 year after Operation Silent Thunder, Captain David Reed stood on the bridge of the Retribution as it orbited the former Vorthan homeworld. The planet below looked peaceful now, its cities rebuilt and its people learning new ways to live. What had once been a world dedicated to war was slowly becoming something else entirely. Status report, David requested from his crew. The education centers are operating at full capacity, Lisa reported from her station. 40,000 young Vorthans are enrolled in cooperative learning programs. The older warriors are adapting more slowly, but progress is measurable. David nodded. The transformation of an entire culture was not something that happened overnight. It would take generations to fully change the Vorthan way of thinking from conquest to cooperation. But the early signs were encouraging. Children who had been taught that strength came from dominating others We're learning that real strength came from helping others. Communication from Earth Command, Tom announced. Secretary General Williams wants to speak with you. The screen activated, showing the face of the man who had once been president of Earth and was now the leader of the United Species Assembly. The old Galactic Council had been dissolved after the war, replaced by a new organization that actually worked to protect the innocent instead of protecting the powerful. David, Williams said with a tired smile. How are things in the Vorthan sector? Slow but steady progress, sir. The younger generation is adapting well to the changes. The older warriors are having more difficulty, but even they are beginning to understand that their old ways led only to destruction. Good. We have a new situation that requires your attention. Long-range sensors have detected a previously unknown species near the galactic rim. They appear to be attacking peaceful settlements in that region. David felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. Even after the war, after all the changes they had made, there were still predators in the galaxy. There were still those who believed that might made right, that the strong had the right to prey upon the weak. How long until we can reach them? David asked. 3 days at maximum speed. But David, remember what we learned from the Vorthans. Sometimes the threat of force is more effective than force itself. The galaxy knows what humanity is capable of now. Perhaps that knowledge alone will be enough. The Retribution and its escort fleet made the jump to the galactic rim, arriving in a system where a new alien species was systematically destroying a colony of peaceful plant-like beings called the Verdani. The attackers called themselves the Nexus Collective, and they seemed to believe that organic life was inferior to their cybernetic enhancements. David watched the tactical displays as the Nexus ships continued their bombardment of the Verdani settlements. The plant beings had no weapons, no defenses, no way to fight back against the mechanical predators that were burning their world. It was the same story humanity had watched play out across the galaxy for centuries, the strong destroying the weak while others looked away. Open a channel to the Nexus fleet, David commanded. The face that appeared on the screen was more machine than living being. Cybernetic implants covered most of its skull, and its eyes glowed with artificial light. When it spoke, its voice was cold and mechanical. Unknown vessels, you are interfering with Nexus operations. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. This is Admiral David Reed of the United Species Assembly, David replied, using the rank he had been given after the war. You are attacking innocent civilians. Cease your bombardment and withdraw from the system. The Nexus commander made a sound that might have been laughter. Humans, we have heard of your recent conflicts with the primitive Vorthans. You're crude. Weapons and simple tactics will not work against superior Nexus technology. David almost smiled. It was the same arrogance, the same assumption that humanity was weak because they appeared peaceful. The galaxy never seemed to learn. I'm going to give you one chance to reconsider, David said calmly. Leave this system now, and we can discuss this diplomatically. Continue your attack and face the consequences. Consequences? The Nexus commander replied with mechanical amusement. You have 12 ships, we have 40. Your organic minds cannot match our computational power. You will be eliminated along with these inferior plant creatures. The channel closed, and the Nexus fleet turned to engage the human ships. David felt the familiar calm that came over him in moments like this. The enemy had made their choice. Now they would learn what that choice cost. All ships, activate combat systems, David ordered. Show them what happens when you threaten the innocent in our galaxy. The battle was even more one-sided than the fights against the Vorthans had been. The Nexus had superior numbers and advanced technology, but they had made the same mistake that every aggressive species made. They assumed that having better weapons meant they understood warfare better. Human ships vanished from sensors as their cloaking systems engaged. The Nexus vessels fired at empty space, while human weapons struck from impossible angles. There, Computational abilities meant nothing when they could not detect their targets. Their superior numbers were worthless when they could not coordinate their attacks. Within minutes, half the Nexus fleet was destroyed or disabled. The remainder tried to retreat, but human ships were faster, and their captains had been planning this kind of engagement for decades. There was no escape for those who chose to prey upon the helpless. "Nexus fleet, this is your final warning," David broadcast to the surviving ships. "Surrender now, or be destroyed." The response came not from the fleet commander, but from what appeared to be the Nexus Central Authority. The voice was different, older, with less mechanical enhancement. "We acknowledge human superiority in warfare," the voice said with obvious reluctance. "The Nexus Collective agrees to withdraw from this sector and open diplomatic relations with the United Species Assembly." David nodded with satisfaction. Another potential threat had been neutralized without the need for complete destruction. The galaxy was learning that humanity's strength was not just in their ability to wage war, but in their willingness to show mercy to those who chose peace. Dr. Emma Shaw had established the Institute for Galactic Peace on a space station at the center of known space. Her research into alien psychology and biology had been expanded into a comprehensive program for preventing conflicts before they started. Species that might otherwise clash were brought together in controlled environments where they could learn to understand each other. But the Institute also maintained detailed files on every species in the galaxy. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their military capabilities, and their psychological profiles. Humanity would never again be caught unprepared for war, but more importantly, they would never again allow war to be the only option. The Verdani survivors were relocated to a new world under human protection, along with the survivors of dozens of other species that had been victims of aggression. The galaxy's refugees had found a new protector, one that understood the cost of violence and was willing to pay the price to prevent it. Captain David Reed stood in his ready room, looking out at the stars through the viewport. His ship was no longer disguised as a cargo hauler. The Retribution flew openly as a warship of the United Species Assembly, its weapons visible and its purpose clear. But its mission had changed from hiding among the shadows to standing guard in the light. A communication came through from a newly discovered species on the far edge of the galaxy. They were a peaceful race called the Harmony, and they were being threatened by aggressive neighbors who wanted to claim their resource-rich worlds. David smiled as he read the message. 3 centuries ago, such a call for help would have been ignored by the galactic community. The strong would have preyed upon the weak, while the powerful looked away and made excuses. But that galaxy was gone, replaced by one where predators knew they would face consequences for their actions. "Tom, send a message to the Harmony," David ordered. "Tell them help is on the way. And send a copy to their neighbors so they know what they're facing if they choose violence over peace." The Retribution turned toward the new crisis, its crew ready for whatever they might find. Humanity had spent 3 centuries learning to be quiet, studying their enemies and preparing for the day when silence would no longer be enough. They had been forced to roar, and the sound had changed the galaxy forever. Now they stood as guardians of a new order, protectors of species that could not protect themselves. The galaxy had peace not because everyone chose to be peaceful, but because someone was finally strong enough and willing enough to enforce that peace. The silent species had found their voice, and they would never be quiet about injustice again.